Hello and welcome to the Eddie's Tech Talk podcast. It's been a few weeks now, but back and better than ever. And I'm going to talk about a really hot button issue, really controversial issue in a lot of places, and that is the concept of pay to win in video games. Now, if you're not a gamer, don't turn it off yet. This does matter to you. We'll get to that, I promise. And I say we because this isn't a solo podcast this time around. I have some help with me. I have my roommate Ryan, who is an avid League of Legends player, and he's just been playing video games all his life. I mentioned League specifically because that has a similar model to the one we'll be discussing today, but it's much less controversial, and we'll kind of get into that. But so he's on the podcast with me, so say hello, Ryan.
Hey guys, thank you for having me on the podcast today.
And then also in here is my other roommate, Will, and he's actually a media and information major at Michigan State University with a concentration in game design. So he's ultimately working towards a career in game design. So really nice to have his expertise along. So say hi, Will.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all.
And you might recognize Will. He's been in a video or two for Eddie's Tech Talk in the past, and he also has edited almost all of the studio content. So nice to bring him back into the fold here. So as we kind of get into things, kind of gonna talk about what pay to win is and kind of why it really matters to everybody. So pay to win is more of just a urban dictionary kind of term. It doesn't have a formal dictionary definition, but it's defined by Urban Dictionary itself actually as pay to win, games that let you buy better gear or allow you to make better items than everyone else at a faster rate, and then makes games largely unbalanced even for people who have skill in the game without paying. So what that really is saying, traditionally in games, you would have progression, so getting better in the game, leveling up, as they say. This would be tied to directly and only to your performance in the game. So, you get better at a first-person shooter game, as you play it, because you learn, kind of the nuances of it. You learn how to play it. You get better and you level up and get better stuff and all that. Or if you're in like Madden, obviously, or some sports title, maybe the first time you play it, you might not be that good, but you'll get better over time. And the only way to get better is to play the game and, progress. Whereas pay to win here, you can pay real money, real dollars. This isn't like a virtual in-game currency. This is real money to get the better stuff, to progress in the game. Maybe you can throw a longer pass in Madden now because you paid money, or maybe you can, shoot a gun a little bit more accurately because you paid money. So then this kind of causes a bit of a schism because people who just play the game and don't have money to be able to afford this, well, they kind of feel left out, and then, obviously they're alienated from those people that pay, to progress. So I don't know if you guys want to kind of add anything there.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because the idea of pay to win is really just generating a competitive advantage in a game. And for all of those of you who aren't avid gamers like we are, if you think about the New York Yankees, they're a very wealthy team owned by very wealthy people, and they have the ability to sign players for a higher contract and pay a luxury tax than other teams. And this really allows them to assemble what they believe to be the best team.
For those unfamiliar, if you're a sports fan, there's a salary cap in most sports. In Major League Baseball, there is basically a recommended salary cap. So the salary of your whole team is not supposed to exceed that threshold, and if it does, you have to pay what Ryan was talking about, a luxury tax. So for each dollar you go over the cap, over that allotted amount, you have to pay a certain amount. So like he was saying, for those unfamiliar, the Yankees can go way over this salary cap number, and it doesn't bother them to pay out for the owners directly to pay out this extra money, whereas a team, maybe like the Oakland Athletics, famous for that Moneyball kind of way to try and win, obviously it puts them at a competitive disadvantage. Will, do you have anything to add there? Or do you think we're pretty good moving forward?
I think that pretty well covers it. Only thoughts I have with pay to win is that it's meant to do the competitive advantage, which it really can vary in every game, and that was pretty well covered.
So, kind of as we move forward with this conversation, now that you kind of know kind of what this is and how it affects, your life and other aspects maybe as well as gaming, why is this even around? Why does this exist? And the short answer is, of course, to make money. And the long answer is a lot more complicated than that. So, just to kind of throw out some data, as we progress, things get more expensive. Cars get more expensive, houses get more expensive, and that's due to inflation and all this other, lots of things going on to cause, the prices of goods to increase. And this really hasn't happened in video games. So, according to an IGN article in 2013, they said that NES game, which is Nintendo Entertainment System, in 1990, so it's 2017 now, but way back in 1990, a game cost $50. And then according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, $50 in January 1990, as of October 2017, $50 has the same buying power as $96.81. So that's almost $100. Now, if you go out any, they call them AAA titles, but that's like the big titles you've heard of, the Maddens of the world, the Star Wars Battlefronts of the world, games you see commercials for, basically, these big studio titles, they're charging $60 for a game. So their argument and kind of their reason for including this pay-to-win system is, well, consumers are generally at least fairly hostile to increases in price without a perceived real increase in content or functionality. So they're kind of going about it with this pay-to-win strategy in order to recoup some costs as game development gets more expensive, and they're not really charging a higher face value for their game. They're expecting gamers to pay additional funds as you go on to kind of recoup those costs. I don't know if you guys want to add anything in regards to that.
Yeah, so much like free to play, which are games now similar to League, Team Fortress 2,
and that's
popular
a
one right now.
Big
is,
portion of the mobile scene as well. We can't leave that out, because most
Yes.
mobile games, they use that. They call it on mobile, they call it a freemium model, free, but you pay, so premium, they kind of match those together.
So yeah, a lot of those games are based around the concept of people playing the game, lots of people playing it, and then either because you're logged in, you can sell that personal information, which is a whole nother topic, or people buying into microtransactions. And the concept of microtransactions, ideally a game wants to attract as many what's called whales to the market, which is people that are willing to spend lots and lots of money in order to be more successful than other players in the game by spending true money to get a digital payout, basically. And this holds true in games like Candy Crush, where you can pay more money to be able to play levels again faster, or if you get your friends to help you out, is the other way. Things like recently, Animal Crossing Pocket Camp has taken this model, which is a mobile game, and you can buy leaf tickets to more quickly craft things, to have more animals to come to your campsite and do all these things. But the way that those games are set up is the production costs are supposed to be offset by either loot crates or leaf tickets or any of the microtransactions, which unfortunately is not always the case, which is why things will tank after a few years and you'll never hear about them again. But then with games such as Star Wars Battlefront, you would assume that the $60 to $80 you're paying should cover the cost of that. But as Eddie had mentioned previously, the cost of games has not gone up, but the cost of production has. So in order to offset that cost of production, you must charge people for other aspects, which is where cosmetics and upgrades to guns and things come in. And it becomes a black hole, basically.
I think you made a really good point, Will, with the models that these games are set up with. And as Eddie mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, I am an avid League of Legends player. League of Legends actually has a very interesting uh, business setting and dynamic with pay to win. And they function under the method that none of the things that you can buy in the game will ever impact the performance of your game, which, as we'll learn a little bit later, is something that made a lot of people angry with Battlefront 2.
Yeah, so I mean, it's important to kind of point out, Ryan, I know that you play League of Legends. That's a game that's been around for a lot of years, and people spend, I mean, just obscene amounts of money on this game because they enjoy the game. A lot of people are obsessed with the game, but that game is free, so you can go and download that game and play it and start getting. You can get going on that game for no money. There's no commitment there from a financial perspective. And obviously they're hoping that you choose to spend money. Whereas, we're going to talk, the reason that this is really relevant, which we'll get to later, is there's a game that we've, already mentioned once or twice, Star Wars Battlefront 2. And, they're charging the full price for that game, yet within that game they have a League of Legends type of model. But then it's even worse in the case that the things that you pay real money for, it is pay to win. It makes you do better in the game just by spending money, not by playing. So, as we keep going here, so we've kind of gone over, the difficult position that designers are in, game studios are in, because they are having to recoup these costs in a little bit different way than previously. And then consumers, you could say maybe they're a little bit helped by this model because the initial cost of entry is lower into the game, but they are really expecting you to spend real money once you have it. So, I mean, what do you guys think? Do you guys really buy the kind of we can't increase the price of our game thing that, these companies are saying? Do you think that the price of games should increase in the future? What do you guys think here in regards to where these game companies, they're in a pickle here? What do you guys think that they should do moving forward?
So this is another concept that people have gotten mad about is DLC, paid DLC for games, right?
DLC is downloadable content. For those that
don't know. Downloadable content. So this is basically an addition to a game after the fact. And a lot of times people have had issues with this where you go buy a game for $60 and then 2 months after you buy that game, out comes a DLC pack for $10 to $15 that really just fleshes out either the story of the game or the content of the game and all this other stuff. And this has come about, and people have said, well, why don't you just give me the full game to begin with if you're going to add DLC and make me pay more? Why don't you just charge me more to begin with? However, unfortunately, most people are unwilling to say, okay, $60 for a game, right? I can do $60. But $100 for a game, which would probably be the more valid end cost if you're paying for all the DLC, all the content and everything, $100 is a little bit harder to spend.
Right, kind of what I was talking about, that initial cost of entry is lower, but I suppose we're getting into almost like a car type of a model. The total cost of ownership, over time, I suppose, might be just that high.
Absolutely. And I have a very interesting take on this concept, and it goes both ways. From a consumer, I would love to see game companies putting the full price out front. I think that most consumers, however, are more willing to pay for something that is cheaper in the short run, and they don't really think about the DLC or extra content, or as you said with cars, the cost of ownership that's coming down the road. So I think that from a business standpoint, it makes sense that they're still charging the $60 that they are today and not for potentially their full price. But as a consumer, I think I would rather see them charging a full price and get the full game out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to agree. If and we're gonna get into Battlefront later. I know we're teasing it quite a bit here, but that's one of my favorite games. The original was one of my favorite games of all time. And if they said, "Hey, pay $100, $110, y'all get everything, go crazy, get at it," I would love that. I would be all over that. Whereas they want me to pay $60 now, and then I just feel hamstrung in the game, and the progression system feels really weird because you don't really progress by playing the game. It's kind of just a broken experience right now. So, I mean, this is so weird. I'm just very against this pay-to-win concept, but I feel like, so far in what we've been talking about, we've been really defending the game companies. We've been really defending these business tactics, and I think that there really is another side to that. Maybe that's the one that's more heavily covered in social media in those places. So I think we did lay out a pretty strong argument for why this is in games from the designer perspective. But I think from the consumer, we're making the consumer look pretty dumb here, which I don't totally agree with. I do think that, Ryan, I agree with your point that people like that low upfront cost, so it does put game companies in a bit of a bind. But, I do have a direct source here, if I can find it somewhere. The CFO of Electronic Arts, who has published Madden, which has some microtransactions, FIFA, which has some microtransactions, and then the big controversial one lately is Star Wars Battlefront 2. He said, and I quote, "We pulled off on the microtransactions because the real issue the consumer had was they felt it was a pay-to-win mechanic." So I think that language there is really, really key. He said the consumer had, the issue the consumer had was they felt it was a pay-to-win mechanic. He didn't say we feel or I feel or, we agree. He's really putting the onus all on the consumer. And he continues to say, quote, "The reality is there's different types of players in games. Some people have more money than time, and some people have more time than money, and you always want to balance those two." And I think that on its face, that's a pretty rational comment. But I really think that they're just coming out and they're blaming these people that are giving them all this money. Like they're saying, I think that they're just really, really blaming the consumer, and it just seems really tone deaf to me. I don't really know what to say about that. It just seems tone deaf to me. EA also came out on the online website Reddit, and they also kind of commented on this game that's out, Star Wars Battlefront 2, and what's going on with it. And they said, they're like, basically, why is this a thing? Why are these heroes, these favorite, characters of mine, why do I have to pay for them again after I already bought the game? And EA says here, basically that's the way it has to be. And I just think that maybe that's not the way it has to be. And I think that these companies really have this really big disconnect with the consumer, if you guys want to elaborate on that, because, EA is being really vilified by, and that's the publisher of Battlefront 2 and Madden and FIFA. They're being really vilified by the gamers, and I don't think that, that's all misplaced.
Well, I find that what they're saying is that because of what the consumer wanted, which was a non-pay-to-win situation, that they changed what the overall aspect of the game was, correct? But I feel that they're truly listening to their consumers, otherwise nothing would have happened. But the fact that they thought that that would be the best choice to begin with is possibly where the issue arises in my mind. But the fact that they're willing to accept that it is an issue, I feel lets them off the hook a little bit, but doesn't fully excuse what they've done.
And I mean, what is it? Oh, yeah, what were you saying, Ryan?
Something really interesting that happened is that EA actually didn't make their changes right away. It took an army of consumers or people on Reddit. If you found that out, they had some interesting numbers of polls from Reddit users that really wanted to change the game and broke some records on the website to try to get EA to pay attention to the consumer when this game came out.
That's true. The EA community team, in a response to a Star Wars Battlefront thread titled "Seriously, I paid $80 to have Vader locked." Darth Vader, obviously the most iconic villain in the Star Wars saga, he is locked from the get-go, so you can't actually play as him when you originally buy the game. You have to earn in-game credits or pay real money to speed that process up to eventually buy Vader down the line. And EA responded, and this has turned into a bit of an internet meme, quote, "The intent is to provide players with a sense of pride and accomplishment for unlocking different heroes. As for cost, we selected initial values based upon data from the open beta and other adjustments made to milestone rewards before launch. Among other things, we're looking at average player per credit earns on a daily basis," end quote. They just go on to say that they'll be making adjustments and all this other kind of stuff. People really were not happy with that response. They have the record for the most downvoted, so it's kind of like a Facebook like. An upvote on Reddit means that you like the post. A downvote means obviously you dislike the post. And they have 673,000 downvotes on that comment. And it just seems pretty tone deaf there with the community. And Ryan's telling me here that he wants to chime in, but I suppose just mentioning Battlefront 2 and not talking about it has been a bit of a disservice so far. So I'll kind of just get into that, and then we can, everyone can know what's going on here. So the reason that this is relevant today, the reason that this is why, we're doing the podcast now and why people care about this now is because EA, Electronic Arts, released Star Wars Battlefront 2. If my parents are listening to this podcast, I played the original Star Wars Battlefront 2 back in the day a ton, and I actually still play it. It's on my computer. I play it. It's my favorite video game ever. So obviously when EA released this new game, I was all about it. I really wanted it. I really wanted to, get into this game, play this game. And, that's where this pay-to-win model is. So you're paying that full price for a Star Wars game, and then once you get into it, the progression, so like we talked about earlier, you don't really level up as much by playing. You get credits for playing, which you then use to buy these loot boxes, which is just a randomized box with randomized stuff in it, and then that increases your level. Or you can pay, you used to be able to pay real money for that, but because of all the community backlash, EA actually turned that feature off. So the only way you can do anything now is through in-game play. But then that's kind of the situation with the game now. I play the game. It is a pretty broken progression system. Like we kind of got into earlier, you don't really just progress by playing normally. It's really that real money spending component is really tied into it, which is obviously controversial for a full price game when other full price games out there, don't have that mechanic. So I just wanted to get that out there about, what Battlefront is, why it's relevant to us, and kind of, the playing field that we're on. So, Ryan, you can kind of add what you were going to add there.
I just thought it was interesting with the EA community team on Reddit, how they mentioned that they wanted to make every player feel a sense of progression in their play when the post was regarding the pay-to-win system. Ever since gaming really was around, players have prided themselves and found a sense of progression through time spent playing their game or ability to play the game. And I think that, like you've been saying, it was really tone deaf of EA to really not consider that, or even to overlook it and think that paying real money was going to give them the same sense of accomplishment or progression.
That's true, and I think that's where that's really where EA and other studios that implement this, we're really going after EA here, but other studios, game studios, do it as well. EA is probably just the easiest to hate on for a lot of reasons, but I think that's where their argument really falls through, because they didn't just come out and say, hey, this is a money grab, which that's what it is. They came out and said, this is a superior system. This is, a great game with a great system. And, they weren't honest about why it was implemented. They didn't say, this is a pay to win system. We need more money for this game. Here you go. So I think that's where their argument really falls through, because that was a great point you made, that their progression, you really don't feel that. And I don't feel that. That's why I haven't played the game as much as I've wanted to, is because I play the game and I don't feel like I'm working towards something. I don't feel like, I'm reaching some sort of higher level of play, or I'm going to get cool stuff as much. It does happen. They do have rewards in the game for a certain number of kills with a certain gun, unlocks a different gun. But I do feel like that's just a bit of a hamstrung system, and I think that is a good point, and where their argument really falls through. So, I mean, Will, do you have anything, to add to this topic, or, is this like a topic that's been commonly addressed so far in your game design concentration? How are people, or your peers in your program, how are people kind of reacting to, what's going on in the gaming industry, with that right now?
Well, a lot of people don't appreciate what's going on with that. And I can understand that, including in the industry I'd like to get into, but I'm going to be a little bit softer on game companies a little bit, because it's a very hard time to get into gaming right now, because charging people for a game isn't as cost effective as making a free-to-play game, unfortunately, because you have a lot wider audience in free-to-play, and the reason behind that is you just have a lot more people that are willing to play a game if it's free. An example of this is the Fortnite Battle Royale mode. There's maybe even hundreds of thousands, or I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but hundreds and hundreds of people are playing this game because of the free-to-play aspect of it. But the ability for them to play that part of the game for free is great, because it pulls them in to play the full game and want to buy it. But overall, I think that what EA has done is unexcusable, but they should really try to figure out the best way to fix it, and I don't think that there is one straight answer on how to fix what they've done.
So, I mean, that is interesting. I think your point about, how people haven't really appreciated what's happening. Do you think there's a particular reason for that? Because, I mean, I think that in gaming right now, this is kind of the hot topic. This is kind of what's going on, is how do games make money? I remember reading about studios being bought up or closing down all the time, because I do think it is hard to make a profitable video game. I think that's true. But, do you have any kind of hypothesis or reason why this isn't really being, I suppose, as appreciated by people in your major as maybe you feel it should?
Well, I mean, the issue is, because of how volatile the game industry is, everybody looks at things and goes, well, that's one way to do that. And there's so many different opinions out there that it's very hard to actually make a choice on what is what. But I feel that microtransactions are a great stepping goal, as long as they are not forcing people to buy them, and would allow people to enhance their gameplay for themselves or others, but not be game breaking in the process.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good take, Will. So, I mean, kind of moving forward, I mean, you kind of went on it, Will, about how, you don't really think that there is a one-size-fits-all answer for how to fix this, but you did kind of mention, or at least alluded to, the fact that there's kind of these two categories here. There's, these AAA, or these more expensive games that ideally, or at least they used to, be the full game when you bought them. And then you have, obviously, the highly profitable mobile games. You have Clash of Clans out there, I know, made a killing, Candy Crush, all these other games. And so it does seem indeed like there's lower development costs with these mobile games or these free-to-play games. And then and there are, obviously, because of that and because of the wider player base potentially, bigger profit margins. So, I mean, do you think, and this is both to Will and Ryan, do you think that that gaming is going to then diverge into these two categories of free to play or cheaper to buy, but with a pay to win component, where you pay for these either gameplay enhancements or cosmetic improvements, and then you'll have the other side where you'll pay, $110 for a game. But then you'll have the full game. Do you guys see that, that happening going forward? Because I think that might be ideal, but I don't see it happening personally.
So a game I can think of that kind of does what you're talking about is Train Simulator, which very, very niche game to begin with, right? But the basics and the starting platform for each game is $24 to $30, right? Or you can get some other stuff with it, but then you buy what you want. So what I mean by that is there is DLC for the game where you can buy whatever trains you want that they've made, any of these things, right? Where it wouldn't be feasible to charge people the total cost for all of this content, because after you get all the DLC, it is $7,281.82. And charging someone almost $7,500 out the door for a game means not only will your, in this case for playership for a already very niche game, go down, it'll be almost non-existent, because that's a huge barrier of entry. Whereas, I like trains, right? Maybe I'll buy the base game, and if I like that, I'll buy the few games that I like, or the few trains I like, right? That makes more sense, where instead of paying $7,000 to go, I don't like this, it's, I'll pay the $20 and I'll spend another $15 on this train, because why not?
I mean,
I think is...
what were you saying?
I think that's the model that fits for a single player. However, that's a very difficult thing to implement into multiplayer.
Yeah, and I think that, that is a good point, and I think that is a really, I think that is where that pricing model and that kind of system makes sense. And I don't think that you're paying to win in that scenario, because it's not a multiplayer game. The only you're playing against yourself, really. So, I like that model, but I just don't really think it's applicable to this scenario, just because that's a single player game, whereas these pay to win games, they're multiplayer, so they pit players against other players, and it's often a battle, just like in Major League Baseball, of who spent the most money, not necessarily who strategized better or anything, of that sort.
Something really interesting to take in about that is really the degree to which these pay-to-win mechanics impact the game. Perhaps there's a very small degree of change. I'm not really familiar with how it was in Battlefront 2, but if it impacts the game minimally, that makes somewhat more sense, excluding, how they just turned a blind eye to how it was made and what they said about the game. Just talking about the changes itself versus, can somebody with hours of experience not beat somebody who is using money to purchase all of the power in a game?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's the slippery slope that game companies are riding going forward, right? I mean, isn't that kind of the heart of the whole issue?
So, yeah, like what Ryan was saying was, could a skilled player beat a player that has spent a ton of money? And that's where I think Battlefront 2 gets a little interesting, is because there were power-ups for certain heroes, specifically Boba Fett, where as he's in the air, he is not able to take any damage, right? So he's basically invulnerable while he's in the air. But then you could also stack another card, which is what allows you to do things and gives you the pay-to-win aspect, is these cards there that if he's in the air, he can't be killed, but his jetpack cooldown card also allows him to be in the air basically indefinitely. This means that not only is he not killable, he's also detracting from the play experience of other people and making it so other players are not able to either play as heroes or that specific hero.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good, I mean, it's a complicated issue, obviously. So, we wanted to bring this issue to light. And, like we said, it does matter if you're not a gamer. This is in other parts of your life. This could invade other business models going forward. And especially, we haven't really touched upon this, but Star Wars, kids watch Star Wars. So kids will want this game. And so I mean, won't this be I think this is a problem that they're marketing this game where you can spend all this money and all this stuff, to kids. I just think that it's an issue, and that kind of segues us into our last topic here, and that really is what is, is pay to win gambling, and that depends on who you ask. Belgium has started investigating EA with Battlefront 2, and they also are investigating Overwatch, which is another similar game in terms of the progression. Obviously, they're not Star Wars games, but and I believe they're investigating another game which is highly competitive, Counter-Strike, for these kinds of. They're investigating is it gambling, and what does that mean? And I think that there is a preliminary ruling. I don't have the source in front of me. I think there was some sort of preliminary ruling that Belgium did kind of rule that there is a gambling aspect to these games, which, in Belgium or in the United States or, really anywhere that there's gambling, that prohibits the sale of those games to kids. So, that's something that these companies have to be cognizant of moving forward. And I know that you guys are both, you guys both have really good, really strong points on whether this is gambling or not, but I'll kind of just, since I have the floor here, I'll kind of share my own thoughts. And I think that this really is gambling, and it gets by on a technicality. Obviously, when you gamble, you have, I guess, maybe almost in a lot of cases, almost certainly the potential to lose all your money or whatever it is you put in and get nothing out of it. The way that these games are able to kind of quote unquote justify that they are not gambling is if you're in Battlefront 2, you pay real money, you buy this loot crate that has, perks or weapons or, power-ups or whatever in them, you'll all the money you spend, you'll always get a crate. So you'll never get nothing. The problem is what you get might not be worth, it might not be what you paid in. Maybe you paid $5 in for some loot crates or something, and you only got out a few different things that is worth, combined value $2. So you always get something, but it might just be a menial value. But the problem is, especially with Battlefront, is you can actually get duplicates. And so the way that they get around that, and they say that's not gambling, let's say you get a crate of all duplicate cards that you already have, through previous loot crates. They give you credits. They say, oh, it's a duplicate, we'll convert it to whatever credit amount and give you that instead. So you always get something out of the deal, but I think that it is gambling from the psychological standpoint. And I've seen people post on the internet, and of course you can't believe everything you hear, so I'm not going to say that this is the most credible source, but I have seen people comment in the Battlefront subreddit on Reddit that, they have gambling addictions, and this triggers the same things in them. You get that dopamine hit, and, you get that to your brain, and it makes you feel good. And, I could even kind of recognize that was happening to me in Battlefront, and, I haven't spent any additional money in the game rather than ordering the deluxe edition of the game so I could play it early. But I haven't invested any additional money, but I could kind of recognize that, oh yeah, this kind of feels good that I'm, having a chance to get maybe a really cool card or something. So in my opinion, I mean, this is really a problem for the gaming industry, and this is kind of where we we tie it all together and say this is a problem for everybody, because if you're a parent out there and you have kids, I mean, the way gaming used to work, you bought them the game, they had the game. Now you buy them the game and they're coming back to you 5 minutes later asking for your credit card so they can buy more stuff, and I just think that it's predatory. I think that it's a real problem. That you're marketing these to kids and people who don't know better. If this was in a rated M title in the United States, well, we rate things E, T, and M for everyone, teen and mature. So mature would be like an adult basically. If you want to put a pay to win model in that, I would be okay with an M game. But you're marketing these games to teens and people who have brains that are still developing and people that just really don't really know any better, and they might not know what's happening to them. So, I mean, I just think that this really, I suppose it might not be technically gambling in terms of a casino gambling, but I really think that it's just as good as, and, that's kind of my argument there. And I know that, Ryan and Will, you both don't necessarily agree with me. And, I think I would love, and the audience would love too, to kind of hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Actually, Eddie, I would have to agree with you on a couple of points. I really like that you brought up the psychology, because whether you like it or not, these microtransactions in video games are really impacting kids with developing brains. Some people are more prone to addictive behaviors, and like gambling, this is one of those things. So parents, please be careful with these kinds of things when your kid comes back asking for $5, $10. It's not just going to happen one time. With a pay-to-win system or even microtransactions in general, these are around forever. And businesses are actively employing these, and it's really a shame that they're going to kids. On whether or not it's gambling, if you look up the definition of gambling or to gamble, please mind that this is not the legal definition, but if you just look up the definition of gambling, it's to stake something on contingency, contingency being a chance. And when you buy these microtransactions, you don't really know what you're going to get a lot of the times. And this is where Belgium is really looking into the law on this case to see whether it is gambling or not. You can pay $2.50 to purchase something in a game and only get something that is worth 7 cents in return. And if a kid is really doing this a lot, that can rack up a lot of money wasted on something that actually might not even do anything for the game, and really it just becomes an addiction.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you were saying at the end there. I mean, doesn't that really just kind of reinforce this behavior, which obviously isn't necessarily a great one?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is just a cycle, and that's what it's putting kids through these days. And they're gonna grow up thinking that it's normal for games to do this, as we talked about how we would like to see something different. But maybe that might not happen with the way that companies are functioning right now in the current state of video games.
Yeah, and I suppose, we might get to a point where people don't really know any different. That's just a part of the game. So I can think back to all the fun times I had playing with friends, and all the, just all the great times we had playing Battlefront 2. And I think some people who are negative to video games just don't understand the memories it can make, and just the fun times you can have with your friends, doing something like that. And I just remember playing Battlefront 2 back in the day, on someone's PlayStation, or, I'd have friends watch me play it on the computer, and I'd watch friends play it. And, we just, that was like my thing with a friend of mine. Shout out to Nathan if you watch this, or listen to this, and that's just something that was great. And then now you're getting that invasive, pay to win experience where, you're not getting that full game, and you are kind of getting these more gambling habits. Will, what do you think about, is this gambling? What do you think about the ethics of all of it? And then, obviously you're the game design major here, so anything else you would add from a professional perspective from you or anyone would be appreciated on this topic. What do you think about it?
Well, I actually just broke out a textbook from my professor, because we were talking about this the other day with how freemium games, getting almost what you want, right, is the same feeling as getting exactly what you want. And this is what gambling relies on is, oh man, I almost got 21, almost got it, right? So next time I got this. And that's what this whole loot box and gambling thing relies on. However, generally, because you're getting something, it doesn't count as gambling, but there is a very predatory pricing scheme for some stuff. Specifically, one thing that my professor, Jeremy Gibson Bond, brought up was that there was a game that he remembers. I don't remember the name of it, and I don't think he has it in this book. I didn't see it. That's what I was looking for specifically. Was you get a fish in your fish tank on your phone, right? You're playing it, right? And your fish dies. Only way to get another fish is to spend $5 and buy a new fish. So if your fish dies, you're required to spend money in order to keep playing the game. If you want to keep any of the progression you have, which would be like upgrades to a tank or any of these things. And it was very predatory because kids would have these fish die, and then every single time they'd be talking to their parents going, hey, do this, sign in, do this. And one kid actually ended up spending thousands and thousands of dollars on this game, and their parents didn't realize this until the credit card bill came in, at which point it was too late for them to do anything about it due to this predatory pricing scheme. That the kids just wanted to keep playing, and in order to keep playing, they had to keep spending money, which I feel is worse than gambling if you're requiring people to spend money for a game that is otherwise free. It's not only predatory, but it's also false advertising.
Something I'd love to touch on or like to add to that is back to the League of Legends campaign, I guess you could call it. But League of Legends does not require you to pay money to unlock anything in the game. The entire game is actually accessible, and this is including all unlocks through just game time spent playing the game. Similar to Battlefront, you actually earn credits in the game that you can purchase all of the characters and any cosmetics that you would like to have. And this is probably one of the safest and farthest away from gambling systems that you can get to. However, it's still an addictive habit that kids and parents and everybody really needs to realize when you're playing these games.
Well, Ryan, for those of us who, like, I don't play League, and for the rest of us out there who might be a little uninitiated, what you just described there does really sound almost identical to Battlefront's system. Could you maybe just kind of clarify a little bit as to why this system in League of Legends is not the same?
Absolutely. And it's a really good point that you brought up. Probably the main difference that you get between League or a AAA title like Battlefront 2 is that League is just a free-to-play game. You were not promised that everything would be unlocked or that you're playing on this new system that is so great, like EA did with Battlefront 2. In fact, they up front what you're getting in the game and how to get it.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean that really is the clarification there, because in these other games where they're not as straightforward in what you're getting and what you have to pay for and those sorts of things. So do you guys have anything to add before we kind of wrap this up here?
On the League of Legends thing, I just would like to touch on that as well. I recently started playing. I've not played much League of Legends, but I played it and I've never felt obligated to buy the game. Whereas in Battlefront, there's times where it's like, oh man, I want this. The only way I can get there quickly is by spending $20. And it's like, well, I don't want to spend money, but if I want to get this other thing that'll make it easier for me to get the next gun, I have to spend money. In League of Legends, I never felt like that. And I felt, even after playing 3 games, I was in a pretty good place to buy whatever I wanted to, as long as it wasn't like 12 heroes. If it was a hero, I was in a good place to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Just kind of the different models and pricing. So, as we kind of conclude here, I'm going to thanks to Ryan and Will. The podcast is definitely enjoyable when you guys are around, so I hope y'all join me for another one. But I hope that you guys have enjoyed us for the now 48 minutes that we've been on this podcast. Whether we joined you in between class today while you're studying for finals or, on your way to work, hopefully we were kind of able to kind of bring this topic to the forefront, even to those of you that don't really game, because obviously for us, for those of us that do game, it's an important topic, but obviously, we've touched on, how this affects kids and other people, and, it's just a big issue out there, something to be aware of. So if you guys have anything to add, any comments, any sort of, any feedback at all, really, for any of the 3 of us, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments section down below. So we're just going to sign off here, and thanks for listening.